What is the tea? Today we are reviewing The Real Housewives of New York City. It is season 14, episode 10, I believe. And we are still on this trip, and we are still seeing ERIN beef with people. We are still seeing Sai be irrational, and we are still seeing the ladies pick at JESSEL. But all in all, still very entertaining. So, this one, the episode was kind of like, there was a lot of like, I don't want to say filler, but just a lot of stuff that I didn't necessarily need to like analyze really. Like, there are a couple of moments on the boat and like the prank stories and stuff like that, even though that stuff tied into the big things, but it just wasn't that important for me. We'll chat about the key things. The first thing that I really noted was that ERIN and Brynn are having this conversation at the top of the episode, and they're kind of going over the whole JESSEL thing. Like, they had gone to dinner the night before, and I don't know if I'm tweaking, but we didn't get this footage. So they went to dinner, and I guess they were pressing JESSEL for more information because remember previously they were, I think, also on a boat again. No, wherever the heck they were. Previously, they had that conversation where they asked JESSEL about herself, and she started giving this very, lengthy answer, and they weren't satisfied with it. So I guess they went to this dinner, and they rehashed the situation. They're asking her more. And this time, it was more so about JESSEL. The premise of the conversation, I guess, was JESSEL saying that when she moved to New York, she didn't have much assistance from her parents because they didn't want her to be in New York. So she got some assistance from an uncle that lived in New York, and she kind of worked her way up from there. Sounds just about reasonable to me. Like, it makes sense, but they weren't feeling that. And so ERIN is telling Brynn, because Brynn wasn't there, she took a time out. She's telling Brynn that she feels like JESSEL wants her story to be everybody else's story. Like, obviously we've talked, and like Brynn has a unfortunate story about her upbringing, and so does Sai. And so, it talks a lot about like being without, right? And so for whatever reason, ERIN has connected some ERIN dots, and she feels like, oh, well, JESSEL is, I guess, embellishing her story in order to feel like she has the same story as Sai and Brynn. That's a very adolescent way of thinking about things. But as I was about to say, like, thinking before you speak, I was thinking before I made that statement, but I almost didn't say it because I'm like, but it makes perfect sense for a conversation that ERIN would be having with Brynn. It makes perfect sense for any conversation that ERIN would be having. But tack Brynn on, it made 125% sense. So I get that they're having that conversation. But here in the real world, that's crazy. I honestly was trying to think about it a little bit more as the episode was going on, but then it was playing out, which was also great. And then we get this scene of basically, I guess, Sai was super turned up, and while JESSEL was giving her perspective and saying, explaining her struggle, then, Sai is kind of like comparing. I think we've all seen this before. I think in anywhere in life, I think that we've seen an opportunity, or maybe we participated in it, where somebody is giving their experience and there's somebody that's challenging their experience by saying, oh, well, it's not as deep because I went through this, but you went through that, I went through this. Oh, you had negative $2 in your account where I had negative $75 in my account. Like, it starts to become this comparison where it's like, I struggle, so if you didn't struggle to the degree of struggle that I think you should have struggled, then you shouldn't be calling it a struggle. And essentially that's what Sai is doing. Sai is like beating down JESSEL by saying like, no, you didn't struggle, like, oh, you think that that's poor, I was really poor, blah blah blah. And it's just like, why is there a comparison? Like, it's literally the opposite of what ERIN is saying is happening. And it's weird because she was there as it was happening. Like, there was no moment where JESSEL was like, oh, I'm just like you guys, and look, I was poor just like you. Like, that never happened. The comparison is coming from the other side of the table where ERIN and Sai sit. So that was weird to me. Like, it just feels like they are committed to JESSEL being wrong. Like, for whatever reason, every time JESSEL says something, it has to be met with adversity. by these ladies, and I just don't get it. And at the end of the day, what's happening is, as Jessel is telling her story that you're asking her for, you guys are diminishing it because I guess it's not sad enough for you. You know what I'm saying? So don't ask her. And I said that last episode, like, well, don't ask her anything. Like, I'm just not understanding. It gets even more interesting, and this happens a lot. Jessel obviously seems to have some type of relationship with Bryn because they were like kikiing at Erin's anniversary party. So they obviously have some type of a relationship, right? And so, Jessel feels comfortable enough to tell Bryn about it, but it doesn't seem like she's doing it in a secretive way, right? Like at this point, they're on a boat, and all the other ladies had gone to swim, and she just says to Bryn, like, I wish you were there to kind of be my bodyguard. Like, those two were really on me last night, referring to Sai and ERIN. And so, she's just talking about it kind of in a lighthearted way. And it's her, Bryn, and UBAH, and she's just saying, like, everything that I was saying, essentially, like I was just saying, it was met with adversity. Like, it just wasn't good enough. Like, I was answering the questions that they were asking me, but the answers just weren't good enough. Like, they wanted more detail, and they wanted to know a timeline of when I moved to New York, and, like, what was in my bank account, what exactly was my struggle, which is exactly what they were doing. Like, you can tell it from the clip that we were shown, even though it was brief. So that's weird. And then UBAH jumps in, and she's kind of mirroring that. Like, she's like, yeah, they were literally doing that. And what was weird about it was that Bryn seemed very receptive to it. And it didn't seem like a calculated receptive. Like, I was wondering if she was listening for the sake of taking it back to the other ladies, but it didn't necessarily happen like that in a messy way, in my opinion. So I'm confused because it feels like she was understanding where Jessel was coming from. Not that she necessarily said it or said like, oh, ERIN and Sai were tripping, but she just seemed like she was receptive to the information. So that was interesting to me. And then UBAH obviously hits the nail. She hit the nail on the head the entire time. Like, they kept going to UBAH's confessionals, and she was literally like explaining the situation word for word, and essentially that the ladies are trying to compare their experiences to Jessel, and there's no comparison here. Like, why is it an issue that she said that she struggled, especially when prompted? It's not like she just jumped out when you guys were talking about your struggles and said, well, I've struggled too. Like, listen to how I've struggled. Like, you guys asked her about herself, and she's giving you this information, but it's not good enough for you. It's super weird. And not only that, it's literally kind of two-tongued. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not good enough, and then also you're comparing it to your situation. The dynamic kind of switches, not necessarily the dynamic, but kind of like the situation switches, because now on the boat, Jessel has gone to like drive the boat, and the group is kind of like in the back, like watching. So then it gets brought up amongst all the ladies now, including Sai and ERIN, that Jessel said, what she had just said. Basically, she needed a bodyguard because they were really on her. Of course, you can hear ERIN audibly just being very like, oh my God, it wasn't even that big of a deal. Like, we were asking her questions. And Sai is very, like, turned up about it. There's something very off-putting about Sai's attitude, and I just don't want to feel that way. But she's just so very dismissive and almost kind of very argumentative, at least in this moment. I don't know if she's like that all the time. Never met her. Seems like a nice lady, beautiful gowns, but she's very amped up for whatever reason, and that continues when Jessel comes back, because essentially they, obviously they address her and they're like, yeah, we heard you had this to say, and she's like, yeah, this is what I said, like she typically does, because this happens all the time. And now it's time to again debate everything that she said, right? Because this is her perspective, and it's weird that they can't understand that everything that comes from Jessel comes from her perspective, because that's typically what happens when people are giving their story or giving their side of a story. It's their perspective. So it's one thing to not agree, right? Fine, maybe you don't agree with the characterization of what happened, but it's another thing to not agree with the way that she's expressing her coming up or her story. Like, you weren't there, so where is this adversary whole argument of thing coming from? because you don't even really know Jessel like that. You weren't there. So that's interesting. I liked how, like I said, I haven't really gotten into the whole comparison thing. Obviously, it's like a recurring thing that they talk about. Jenna kind of gets some like favoritism within the group. So I do like how Uba was able to assert in her confessional, like, there's literally no, what she say specifically? She's like, there's no agenda when it comes to Jenna, right? Like, Jenna can say any story that she wants and nobody's really questioning it. It just kind of is what it is. But then as soon as Jessel says something and she has facts and she proves it, like you guys are asking her for facts and all this stuff, she'll produce it and you'll still be like, she's lying. And that is weird. Like, again, I'm not really into the dynamic of it, like the Jenna, how they treat Jenna versus Jessel of it all, but I definitely recognize it with Jessel period. Like, they're just weird with her, and it's just, I really want to be able to put my finger on it. Like, somebody tweeted that basically they have this preconceived notion about Jessel, and from what Sai said, whatever episode that was, is because she has this accent. And I think that they assume that she comes from wealth and that she didn't have a hard life in that assumption. But now that they're asking her and she's telling them exactly what it is, they don't like the answer. And it's being met with conflict for whatever reason. Not like a new understanding, like, oh, we didn't know that. It's being like, oh no, that's not good enough for us. Like, that doesn't fit the narrative that we had for you. And that's just super weird. Erin's literally like, they're going back and forth. You know, when you're going back and forth, you're in an argument, like, you just start blurting out things. Erin's literally telling this woman that her life wasn't hard. Like, how are you to tell her that? Like, what do you mean? And it's so weird because I believe I said this, whatever episode it was that Jessel and Erin had to sit down. I believe it was episode 2. I said it very early on. Like, it's just so weird because Erin's basically Erin's basically a Nepo baby. You know what I'm saying? From my understanding, from what I've heard on the show. And so, which is nothing wrong with that. Like, she's received help from her parents. She even said it on the episode, like, I received help from my parents. And it's like, great. So then why do you feel like, it kind of feels like she thinks that everybody else has to have had help. Like, why are you trying to deflect and call out everybody else's help? Like, nobody else could have struggled just because it doesn't really seem like you struggle. Like, you got that hand up, so now, oh, well, Jessel must have had a hand up. Like, that's the weirdest level of deflection ever. It's so strange. And it's like, why are you trying to put that off? Because it's not even a topic of conversation. Like I said, I clocked it early that Erin kind of has some Nepo baby isms in her. But now it's kind of coming off as like an insecurity. Like, she feels this way about herself, and it feels like she's trying to put it off on Jessel. When it's not even a topic of conversation. Like, maybe wait a couple seasons before people start calling you a Nepo baby, and then you want to, defend yourself and push it off on other people. Don't let your insecurities speak for you. It's super weird. But too late. I mean, Jessel's already in her confessional clocking it. She's just like, Erin's the one with the privilege, so I just don't really understand, like, where this is coming from. We even get, like, we always kind of get these, it's typically the same ladies. I mean, we've kind of gone through the list. So it's typically Uba and Jenna who provide the reasonableness here. And Jenna even asks Erin, like, why does this bother you so much? And Erin's like, because it's just so, what she say, disingenuous? Like, and it's just like, how? Like, she's telling her story from her perspective. Like, how is it, like, what are you saying? Like, what is this opinion based on? It's kind of what's frustrating me, which is why I'm talking in circles. Like, I just need to know, what is this opinion based on? Like, what do y'all know about Jessel that we don't know? Like, how do you know that she's lying? Just tell us. Just tell us. So I mean, at the end of the day, I like that Jessel was able to clock the tea and say that Erin is projecting her privilege onto her. Like, it just kind of is what it is. And I like that she wasn't getting fired up. Even when Sai is sitting here yelling, like, just doing all of this and going crazy, and Jessel sitting literally right next to her, completely calm. It's just like, you're upset about nothing. And she's screaming and yelling. She even brings up the whole, like, the other night before that, right? When she was telling that long story, they asked her about her childhood, and she started talking about her family and how they migrated, and Uba has to step in again, and she's like, that is part of her story. Like, at the end of the day, right? She didn't say, like, well, Jessel did this, and when Jessel turned 5, Jessel did this. Like, sure. But when people tell other people about themselves, especially if they're an immigrant, especially if that contributed to the story, how she got to America, how she ended up being here and is classified as an immigrant because her parents and her family immigrated. That's naturally going to be a part of her story. And like I said last time, that's her perspective. That's how she chose to tell the story when somebody asked her about herself and where she comes from. So I get feeling like that's not part of your story, girl. We don't really want to hear that. That's one thing. But like being upset about it and telling her that it's wrong, like how can you tell somebody that their perspective is wrong, especially as it specifically pertains to them? This doesn't have anything to do, let's keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, this has nothing to do with anyone else. She hasn't put anybody else's name in it. She hasn't said, well, Aaron was there with me and Sai came on over with me and Sai struggled with me and me and Sai lived in my uncle's house. Like, it has nothing to do with them. This story literally pertains only to Jessel and her family, and yet they hate it. Later on down the line, which I thought was also interesting, I'm going to use that word a lot, like now they're having a conversation where they want to bring up everybody's most embarrassing story. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, when are they going to stop opening the floor to ask Jessel about herself so that they can pick apart her answers? Like, I just don't even know why we're back here, but let's just see how this goes. And surprisingly enough, she gives a story. I don't quite listen to it because I'm gonna be honest with y'all. Like, this didn't really tickle me, and then also I was thinking to myself, like, would I have an embarrassing story to tell? And I just didn't feel like I had a good story to contribute. So I kind of started feeling secondhand embarrassment because I'm like, dang, like they would definitely pick my story apart because I don't have much to say. But anywho, like, to my surprise, they believed Jessel's story, and like it wasn't met with any like conflict or anything. They just hee hee ha ha and they moved on. And then even more to my surprise, Erin was the one with the weak story. But nobody called her disingenuous. Like, nobody acted like there was a big deal or like there was a sorcerer's stone hiding at Erin's house or anything like that. Like, we get to the end of the episode. Obviously, there was a lot of chatter about pranks, more than I feel like was necessary. But essentially, Uba pushed Erin in the pool at some point on the trip, so that was considered to be a prank. And Erin feels like, once you start pranks, then we continue pranks. She has a bunch of siblings, so they do pranks in her family, blah, 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 woo, woo, woo. And there was an understanding that she was going to push Uba back into a pool at some point. Uba understood that as well. They get to the end of the episode, and Uba is anticipating this push and asking Erin not to do it. So I believe that Sai did it for Erin. And so Uba thought that the score was settled. The pranks were done, but Erin didn't feel that way. So Erin, I guess, Uba had left her phone in the van from where they were traveling at some point, and Erin took the phone and kept it for about 45 minutes before Uba realized that it was gone. I believe it was like at nighttime or in the middle of the night. And at that point, she's looking for it with Jessel, and Sai hears them, so Sai comes out. She kind of hits to Jessel like, oh, go up to Erin's room, she's got the phone. So that's how they ended up finding it. I can understand that frustrating me. I don't know that I would be pissed off, but I'm saying all that to say that's my perspective. We've talked a lot about perspective today, so I'm going to circle this out. So I don't necessarily have an opinion as it pertains to how Uba is responding to having her phone taken. She obviously has very strong feelings about it. Would I have the same amount of strong feelings? I don't know, maybe not necessarily, but she did. Point blank, period. And her tactic with dealing with it was to tell people that she was upset about it. And then she was also upset about Sai because Sai knew, right? So she was upset with Erin for taking it. She was upset with Sai because she knew. And her way of dealing with it was that she didn't want to talk to them. At the end of the day, like, she told the people that she told that she was upset. And then when it came to Sai and Erin, even when she came down for breakfast or whatever the heck she was doing, she decided not to speak. And that's fine. At the end of the day, like, it's not like she started drama. She didn't try to, like, argue with them about it. She just didn't speak. It was what it was. But that was not good enough for Erin. And I think that we should have a sub part of this show that's called Not Good Enough for Erin. I mean, I guess I will give a crumb of credit to Sai because she did say that she understands why Uba would be upset, and she wouldn't necessarily herself be that upset, but she understands why Uba is upset. But she did kind of lose that crumb when she was like, well, I wouldn't dwell on it. And we just have to be careful about the language that we use for multiple reasons. Because, first of all, you can't tell UBA how to respond to something that affects UBA. That's A. So I don't agree with saying that she dwelled on something. And then the part B of that is that, Sai, you dwell on everything. Like, you literally were just screaming at Jessel because you don't like her. This is where I come from story. And you're dwelling on it because it happened a day or two before and you're on the boat screaming about it. Like, you're upset about it. So maybe you should stop dwelling on things. Even worse, I mean, I didn't expect anything productive to come from ERIN. But I mean, I guess I'll give the crumb to Sai back because she did tell ERIN, like, well, I'll be upset with you too. So that is a level of accountability there. But ERIN comes out of her mouth, like, the hypocrisy is insane. She comes out of her mouth to say that UBA is unreasonable. I don't even know if I need to go into that read. Like, it's like ERIN literally put herself into a book, a very short and concise book, because this one, honestly, this one has an audible version. Okay, it reads itself to you. She literally sat that book down and gave it to us to read. Here's ERIN, chapter 1 and done. Because girl, you are the most unreasonable person that has touched this cast. Okay, and we have seen it almost every episode. So, the hell are you talking about? Also, like, it's the fact that ERIN is diminishing it to other people and telling other people that she feels like it's not that big of a deal. Have that opinion, I guess. But I think that I would stand. ERIN feeling so strongly about it is weird because UBA has not approached her. UBA hasn't said a thing to her. I get that she's ignoring her and not saying anything to her, and that's triggering ERIN. But it shouldn't be triggering her to the fact that she feels like she has to fight and be upset about it and make big comments about it. Like, let her ignore you. Let her be upset. It is what it is. She hasn't said anything to you, so there's nothing to discuss. I could get if she came to you and she wanted to go off about it, but that didn't happen. So until that point, like, I just don't get really carrying it on, being like, she's being unreasonable and she's being this. Like, that just didn't make sense to me. He also throws in the fact of, well, when UBA threw me in the pool, like, I was fine with it because I'm chill. And it's like, there's nothing chill about you. Like, you literally just gave us chapter 2 to read. Like, you're not a chill person. Nobody here believes that, not even you. But then she goes on to, from what I saw, antagonize UBA because UBA's not speaking to her, as we've already highlighted a couple times. And it gets to a point where they're trying to collect all the ladies to go wherever the heck they're going. And UBA's making it clear, like, oh, because they're downstairs in, like, the entryway, the foyer, whatever. And she makes it a point to say, no, ERIN's down here. Like, ERIN's ready to go. This is who's down here. We're collecting the girls. And ERIN jumps in to be like, don't say my name. Like, with a whole attitude. And so I like that this gave me some background information because we kept seeing the clip of UBA getting into ERIN's face, and we're like, what happened? What happened? What happened? And ERIN literally got bucked. Like, she's literally like, don't say my name. I don't care. Don't say my name. To this lady that hasn't said a word to her all day. So ERIN was obviously looking for a moment, and she got it at the end of the day. UBA never should have touched ERIN's belongings, like taking her glasses off her face, because that's incredibly disrespectful and it's way too close to assault. It could actually be assault. I don't know the definition as it pertains to that, but you're touching her belongings and your hands are damn near on her face. Don't do that. She should have never done that. It's way too confrontational. But I will also say that ERIN started off being confrontational. She was looking for that conflict because it's like, okay, girl, you're not going to say anything to me. You're not going to address me. I'm going to make sure that you address me. And that's exactly what ERIN was doing. So ERIN should not have done that either. She asked for a moment and she got it. So, I mean, I'm interested to see, obviously from the preview, it looks like they continue to argue about this a little bit more and it stays heated. So I'm interested to see where this goes, and I'm also interested to see the perspective of the other ladies as it pertains to this situation. Like, how do they feel about it? What do they have to say about it? But I think it's just so, it is very clear to see what type of character ERIN is. Like, she kind of demands attention, right? Like, she really honestly could have been fine with not addressing this situation. She felt it was like so not an issue, right? The phone thing with Uber, and she didn't understand why Uber was so upset. So why even go out of your way to get an interaction with Uber started? You could have just ignored her. And I think that that's a common thing that we've all learned from our parents. And Erin is a parent, so I can imagine that she would tell her kids this just like anybody else would. Like, you know what I'm saying? Just ignore them. You don't like somebody, ignore them. Somebody's annoying you, ignore them. It's a bad situation with somebody, ignore them. We've all heard that before or taught it to a child before. So I think that she could have had that moment of self reflection and just ignored Uba the way that Uba was ignoring her. But, we'll see what happens next episode. See y'all.